They sat me in the garage. Fold-out chair, plastic table, a fan that barely worked. At my parents' anniversary party. And when I asked my dad why, he didn't blink. It's just for extended family. Extended family. Everyone else was seated inside. Warm lighting, music, catered plates. Even my cousin Mark was there, the same cousin who once stole money from their safe. He was inside, laughing, toasting. I was in the garage, like clutter, like something they didn't want to show the guests. My name is Selena, and from wherever you're watching this video, stay with me, because sometimes the most beautiful kind of revenge is the one that's so silent it echoes. I didn't make a scene. Not right away. I sat there for 7 full minutes just looking around. At the extension cords on the wall. The old bike no one had ridden in years. The folding table with lukewarm appetizers and paper napkins. I looked down at my dress, the one I'd saved up for. Simple, elegant, black. The heels I'd borrowed from a friend just for the occasion. I had driven 3 hours. Bought a thoughtful gift. Wrote a letter inside it that I'd cried over twice. And now I was sharing a table with a lawn mower. I stood up, walked inside, and scanned the room. There was Mark, telling a story about his last vacation. There was Aunt Renee, sitting at the table I should have been at. There was my mother, laughing as if she didn't know where I was. I walked to the front, right past the cake, right up to the gift table, picked up my envelope. Quietly, intentionally, my father saw me, his eyebrows raised. "Selena, what are you doing?" I looked right at him, extending the respect you gave me. Then I turned, held up the envelope, and said, loud enough for the room to hear, "Extend this." I walked out the front door. No screaming, no tears, no big scene, just silence. And then I heard her, my mother, running after me in heels, calling my name, asking, "Wait, what are you doing? Don't do this." But it was already done, because that night they didn't just seat me in the garage. They told the truth, the one they'd been hinting at for years. And I finally listened, but they had no idea what I'd been preparing all along. And what happened next would strip them of the one thing they valued more than reputation. Control. I was always the good one, the helper, the polite one, the one who didn't ask for much. If Mark got caught shoplifting, I was the one they sent to keep him company while he cried in the car. If my older sister threw a fit during dinner, I was the one who cleaned the table and quietly packed up leftovers while everyone pretended nothing happened. Being useful became my only currency, but being visible, that was never allowed. When I got into university on a partial scholarship, my dad barely looked up from his laptop. "That's great, but let's not brag. Your cousin Daniel got a full ride." When I landed my first job, an entry-level admin position with a nonprofit I loved, my mom asked, "Will that even cover rent?" They didn't mean to be cruel. At least, that's what I used to tell myself. They were just selective. Selective with their attention. Selective with their praise. Selective with who they brought forward when company came over. It was always the same people. The cousin who lied. The uncle who drank. The sister who dropped out and moved back home. They all got second chances. They all got seats at the table. Me, I got duties. Help set the table, Selena. Run to the store, Selena. Can you pick up Mark from the station? The worst part? I kept saying yes, because somewhere inside, I believed if I kept being helpful, they'd eventually see me, eventually choose me. But what happened at that anniversary party? That was my breaking point. Not because of the garage, but because when I looked through the window from the outside, I saw my family laughing like I wasn't missing, like they hadn't noticed I was gone. That's when I realized I wasn't just excluded. I was optional, replaceable, easily boxed away when I didn't fit the image they wanted to display. And in that moment, standing on the front lawn in borrowed heels, envelope clutched in one hand and 27 years of swallowed pride in the other, I made a decision, not just to walk away, but to show them what happens when the invisible one finally removes her support. Because they had no idea just how much of their life I held together. And when I let go, they would feel it. I didn't call the next day, didn't text, didn't apologize. I just vanished. Not from the world, just from theirs. No more answering my mother's calls on the first ring. No more sending reminders for doctor appointments. No more updating the extended family spreadsheet I had managed for the past 6 years. Birthdays, allergies, emergency contacts, all of it. It was subtle at first. Just a small emptiness. But small cracks turn into deep ones, fast. 3 days after the party, my sister texted, "Hey, Mom's asking if you mailed the thank you cards for the florist and DJ? She thought you'd already handled it." I didn't reply, because I had always handled it. Quietly, automatically, invisibly. But now, they were on their own. By the end of the week, I heard from Aunt Renee, the same one who had taken my seat at the party without blinking. "Hi, sweetheart. Your mom said you were upset? She didn't mean to offend you. It was just a mix-up with the seating." A mix-up. Funny how the only mix-ups always happen to me. The gift envelope was never mentioned. They didn't ask what was inside. A generous check and a handwritten letter with every memory I had of their marriage. Every time I saw them love each other in ways they didn't see themselves. They didn't ask because they assumed they were still entitled to it. My father left a voicemail on day 9. "Selena, I know you're upset, but this little tantrum, it's making things harder for everyone. Just call your mother and sort it out." Tantrum. That was the word. Because in his world, the only reason a woman ever stands up for herself is emotion. Not boundaries. Not hurt. Not a lifetime of being overlooked. Just drama. That message? I saved it, not to keep the pain, but to remind myself why I left. Then came the mistake. My mother tried to host a small brunch with her charity friends. A post-party thank you. She assumed I'd scheduled the catering. She assumed I'd sent the invites. Confirmed the guest list. Coordinated with the florist. She even texted me, "Make sure they bring lilies. You know I hate roses." I left it on read. The day of the brunch? Nothing arrived. The guests stood in a half-decorated backyard. No food. No drinks. No music. Just embarrassment. And still, she didn't say the words I was waiting for. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "We need you." Not, "We were wrong." Just this, "I thought you'd take the high road, Selena." But here's what she didn't understand. I was on the high road. I just stopped carrying their load with me. I didn't want revenge. Not the movie kind. Not the screaming, flipping tables, burn it all down kind. I wanted truth. I wanted them to see the machine they'd built and how much of it only ran because I turned the gears in the background. So I started with the family fund. A long time ago, my parents opened a joint savings account for family emergencies. Nothing formal, just something to cover last-minute plane tickets, urgent expenses, birthdays no one budgeted for. They let everyone use it, as long as it went through me. I'd been tracking it for years. I had login access, monthly reports, even the tax statements they forgot I prepared every April. They never noticed it was my name on the backup authorization form. They just assumed I'd always manage it, like the polite daughter I was trained to be. That same week, I requested my removal. Quietly, formally, legally. I also sent a courtesy notice to the bank, flagging inconsistencies I'd long kept quiet about. Duplicate reimbursements, unexplained withdrawals, even a cash transfer to my cousin Mark. Yes, the same one who stole from them years ago. Nothing criminal, just sloppy. They'd been too comfortable for too long. Next, I contacted my cousin Dahlia, the only one who ever sat with me in the kitchen while the real guests laughed in the next room. She's a graphic designer now. Brilliant. Underpaid. I offered her a project, one I'd been planning for months but never had the nerve to start. A community blog. Small. Focused on quiet family estrangement. Stories from people like me. People who weren't kicked out violently, just gently set aside until they disappeared. We called it The Spare Chair. Dahlia designed the logo. I wrote the first piece. We didn't name names, but anyone who knew my parents would know exactly who that first story was about. And finally, I pulled the thread they never thought I'd touch. The anniversary photos. A distant cousin had taken them. I had offered to coordinate the photographer. In return, he'd given me full access to the folder. I downloaded everything. Every picture of everyone. except me, because I wasn't in them, not even one. But the captions they wrote online said, "So grateful to have our whole family together. A perfect day." So I emailed the photographer, asked him to take the gallery down. He agreed and added a line I'll never forget. They said it was a family portrait, but it looked like something was missing. Exactly, something was. And they were finally starting to feel it. They didn't notice the collapse all at once. It came in fragments. A brunch canceled, a fund frozen, a gallery gone. But the moment that really hit? The night of the follow-up celebration dinner, the one my mother planned to repair our image with her friends. The florist didn't show. The menu was wrong. One of the guests canceled, citing confusion around the event's coordination. Why? Because for years that had all gone through me. I wasn't invited this time, obviously, but I still got photos from Dahlia, who had a friend working the event. My mother looked tired. My father? Distracted, like a man realizing the stage manager quit in the middle of the performance. 2 days later, I received a text from my mother. "I wish you'd reconsider all this. Family doesn't treat each other this way, especially over something so small. Small, being seated in the garage like an afterthought, having your gift taken off the table, hearing your own father say extended family while your thief of a cousin sat front row. That wasn't small. That was pattern. A pattern I had finally broken." Then the photos vanished from their Facebook albums. The ones labeled Perfect Night and Grateful for a Whole Family. Gone. Not replaced. Just quietly deleted. Like removing the evidence would erase the truth. They didn't know I'd already backed them up. Because I wasn't trying to destroy their story. I was documenting mine. That same week, I published my third post on the spare chair. It was titled, "The Day I Stopped Apologizing for Taking Up Space." No names, no spite, just truth. The post went semi-viral in family forums and quiet corners of the internet. It was shared by therapists, grief coaches, adult children who had sat through one too many dinners in silence. And at the very bottom, I left this. Sometimes it's not the shouting that breaks you. It's the smile across the table while they ignore your empty plate. My inbox flooded, not with hate, with recognition. You wrote what I've never been able to say out loud. I thought I was the only one. Thank you, thank you, thank you. But one email stood out. It was from a woman in her 50s. They sat me next to the coat rack at my own sister's wedding. I was 7 months pregnant and nobody said a word. I wish I'd walked out like you did. I cried reading it, not because I was sad, because I wasn't alone. And when you've spent a lifetime being told to wait your turn, fade into the background, and be the bigger person, hearing me too is more powerful than any apology. Back in my parents' world, they were still trying to keep things together. But now, even their friends were asking quiet questions. Where's Selena these days? Did I hear she runs something online now? Was she not at the party? And for the first time, they had no answer, because the person they always dismissed had become the one they couldn't explain away. They always thought of me as the stable one. Never dramatic, never demanding, never difficult, which made me the perfect person to erase quietly until they needed something handled, fixed, or forgotten. But when the world started noticing I was gone, their story stopped making sense. It started with a local newsletter feature about generational leadership in community families. They were interviewed about the family fund, the same one I'd quietly stepped away from. The article mentioned Selena handled our logistics for years, in past tense. But one of the reporters had followed the spare chair. She emailed me for a quote. I declined. Still, she connected the dots. The story went live with this sentence. Notably absent from recent events is Selena, long considered the logistical core of the family's philanthropic work. Just one sentence, but it opened a floodgate. Within days, the foundation received 2 calls from longtime donors. Not angry, just curious. We were under the impression Selena still coordinated programs. Has that changed? Why is her name not on any of the upcoming campaigns? They didn't have an answer, because for years they never needed one. I was just the daughter in the background. Now, the background was missing, and people noticed. Meanwhile, the spare chair kept growing. Submissions tripled. Dahlia and I had to build a second site folder just to organize the stories pouring in. There was one from a teacher whose mother told her not to bring her same-sex partner to Thanksgiving. Another from a man who was told he could sit with the caterers at his brother's wedding. Each story different, but the message was the same. You're welcome here, as long as you don't need a real seat. My parents still didn't reach out with anything real. My mother forwarded an invite to a smaller, more intimate dinner. No subject line, no apology, just, we'll keep a spot open. That was it. I didn't reply, because I didn't want a spot. I wanted respect. And now, I had it, from people who never once made me beg for it. Then came the audit. Remember that family fund? Turns out the casual management had caught attention after my formal exit. The bank flagged repeated cash withdrawals from multiple relatives, none of which were properly tracked. No one was accused of theft, but questions were asked. And for a family obsessed with control and image, being questioned was the worst kind of scandal. My cousin Mark messaged me out of nowhere. You're really trying to ruin everyone, huh? I didn't respond, because I wasn't trying to ruin anything. I had just stopped protecting the illusion. I received a final email from my father. 3 words. We're disappointed, Selena. Not surprised. Not curious. Not sorry. Just disappointed. I almost laughed, because in the end, disappointment was mutual. Except I didn't burn bridges. I just stopped pretending there ever was one. I always thought rising would feel like revenge, like applause, like validation, like finally being proven right in front of everyone who doubted me. But it didn't. It felt like quiet mornings, like drinking coffee in a space that didn't ask me to shrink, like laughing with people who didn't keep score, like watching my own reflection grow softer and stronger at the same time. That was the real rise. The spare chair hit 100,000 monthly readers. We didn't market it, didn't chase virality, just let the story speak. We added a podcast, invited real people to share their moments. Not trauma porn, just truth. One episode, I was uninvited to my own baby shower. Another, he called me dramatic. I called a moving truck. Every voice was a brick in the house I never had growing up. A house where no one had to earn their seat. Where family wasn't a weapon. Where silence didn't mean safety, it meant choice. I moved into a small 2-bedroom place on the edge of town. It wasn't fancy. No crown molding. No long dining table built to impress guests. Just bookshelves I filled myself. Walls I painted the exact shade of green the first wanted. And a desk where I wrote in the early mornings, not for approval, but for myself. Sometimes I lit a candle before I wrote. I always chose the same scent, fig and cedar, warm, earthy, whole. I made new friends, not ones who knew my parents, not ones who asked, but do you think they meant to hurt you? Just people who took me as I was, people who said, you don't owe anyone your softness just because they raised you. My sister reached out eventually. An email. I don't agree with how you handled it, but I miss you. That was it. No ownership. No accountability. Just a thread, hoping I'd be the one to weave the whole thing back together. I didn't respond, because I wasn't interested in returning to the table. I was building better ones, and the people who sat at mine brought their own napkins. They didn't expect me to serve them and thank them for being there. One day I was interviewed for a podcast I admired. They asked, what would you say to the version of yourself who stayed in the garage that night? I took a long breath before I answered. I'd say, I know you're scared. I know you think leaving makes you selfish. But one day, you'll sit at your own table, and you'll realize that leaving wasn't betrayal. It was the beginning of becoming someone no one gets to ignore again. I still remember the exact sound the chair made when I stood up from it in the garage. That awkward metal scrape, one I was supposed to ignore. One that was meant to blend into the background of just be grateful you're invited. It was the moment I chose myself, before I even knew what choosing myself looked like. That sound, it became the start of everything. Sometimes I drive past my parents' neighborhood, not to stare at the house, not to fantasize about some dramatic reunion, just to remind myself that I don't live there anymore. Not physically, not emotionally, not in the quiet corners of my mind that used to hope for something soft to bloom where only sharp edges had ever been. I don't hate them, truly, but I don't miss them either. I miss the idea of them, the version of family I tried to believe in, the version of me that thought if I just stayed helpful long enough, I'd finally be chosen without needing to prove myself. That girl? She deserved better. And now, she has it. My mother never apologized. My father never called. But that's okay, because closure doesn't always come from an apology. Sometimes it comes from no longer needing one. Sometimes it's found in the sound of your own voice when it's finally loud enough to fill the room they kept trying to shrink you out of. Sometimes it's found in silence you chose. Last month, someone from the original anniversary party messaged me. Not family, just one of the guests. I didn't know what happened that night, but I remember you. You were the only one who looked real in the whole room. I stared at the message for a long time, because I used to think being quiet meant being small. Now, I know better. Being quiet can mean power. Being calm can mean certainty. And walking away doesn't make you heartless. It makes you free. Sometimes I think about the letter I wrote that night, the one I had sealed inside the envelope on the gift table. It wasn't angry. It wasn't bitter. It was a letter of memories, of thank yous, of moments I thought mattered. I never gave it to them, but I kept it, not to remind myself of what they lost, to remind myself of what I gave for so long without ever being asked how much it cost me. And now, I give to people who give back. I love without dimming. I stand without permission. They once asked me to sit in the garage so the photos would look better. Now, I don't need to be in the photo because I built the whole frame. And the story I'm living now, it may not be picture perfect, but every single part of it includes me. You owe your sister. Donate your bone marrow to her. My mother's voice cracked across the living room like a whip. Nicole sat on the couch, pale, tears carefully arranged on her cheeks like she was auditioning for sainthood. My father stood behind her, arms crossed, silent, but nodding. Always nodding. She's dying, Mom said, and you're the only match. I looked at them, at the same 3 people who had watched Nicole destroy my career, lie to my boss, sleep with my fiancé, and still had the audacity to call me the selfish one. She's family, Dad finally muttered, like that word was supposed to erase everything she'd done. That's when I smiled. Calm, slow, the kind of smile that made my mother blink. Actually, I said, reaching into my purse, she's not. I pulled out the envelope. Thick, sealed just hours ago. The room shifted. Nicole's hand froze mid-wipe across her cheek. What is that? My mom asked. I opened it, unfolded the paper. Read the line I'd memorized 100 times already. Probability of full sibling relationship, 0%. My voice was steady. I took a DNA test. 2 weeks ago. They all stared. My mom shook her head. That's not possible. Oh, it's possible, I said, holding out the paper. In fact, it's printed right here. Dad's face went pale. My mother's lips parted like she was going to scream, but nothing came out. Nicole? She just stared at me, because for once, her perfect little script had been rewritten, and I was the one holding the pen. My name is Sierra Lane, and from wherever you're watching this video, stay with me, because the moment they told me to save my sister's life was the same moment I realized she was never my sister to begin with. Nicole was always the favorite. Not just a little, not like, oh, she's older, she needs more help kind of favoritism. I mean blinding, suffocating, unspoken but everywhere favoritism. When I got good grades, they smiled. When Nicole passed her driving test on the 3rd try, they threw a backyard barbecue. When I won a scholarship, Dad said, don't brag. It makes your sister feel bad. She was the fragile one, the pretty one, the one Mom called our little star while I stood in the shadows, carrying the weight of being the responsible daughter, the invisible one. But I didn't hate her. I told myself families were messy, that maybe I was just more independent, that love looked different for everyone. I held on to that lie until the day Nicole ruined everything. It started with my engagement. Tyler and I were together for 4 years. Solid. Kind. We had a plan. Save money, move to a new city, start fresh. I told Nicole everything. I confided in her like sisters are supposed to. 2 months before the wedding, he called it off. No explanation. No closure. Just a message that said, I can't do this. I broke. And I still didn't suspect her. Not until I found the messages. Flirty. Cruel. Shameless. From Nicole to Tyler. Weeks worth of texts. Pictures. She'd been seducing him behind my back. And when I showed my parents, Mom shrugged. It's not like you were married. Dad said Tyler made his own choice. But Nicole didn't stop there. A few weeks later, HR at my job called me in. An anonymous tip had been submitted to corporate, suggesting I was leaking client information for money. Fake screenshots. Doctored emails. It almost worked. I only kept my job because my manager knew me well enough to dig deeper. The anonymous account? Linked to Nicole's Wi-Fi network. I brought it up at dinner. My mother said, You're not perfect either, Sierra. That was the night I stopped pretending I had a real sister. I went low contact after that. No family holidays. No calls. No texting birthday wishes to people who would never return the effort. But then the call came. Nicole was sick. Aggressive leukemia. She needed a bone marrow transplant, and I was the only match. Suddenly, I was important again. Suddenly, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. And suddenly, they expected me to forget everything. Forgive everything. But what they didn't know was that I had already started digging. And the truth I uncovered? It made everything make sense. After the diagnosis, the story shifted fast. One moment, I was the forgotten daughter. The next, I was cast as the selfish one refusing to save her poor, helpless sister. The pressure came hard, and from every angle. Family friends started messaging me. Old church ladies I barely remembered were calling me heartless. An aunt I hadn't spoken to in years left a voicemail crying, She needs you, Sierra. How can you live with yourself if she dies? The guilt wasn't subtle. It was relentless. My mother would text every morning like a campaign manager. Nicole's white blood cell count dropped again. The doctors said it has to be you. She's still your sister, Sierra. Still your sister. They kept repeating that like it was scripture, like it canceled out every betrayal, every lie, every scar Nicole had left behind. I started to question myself. Maybe I was being cruel. Maybe I really was cold, like they said. Maybe I was broken from years of swallowing disappointment and just couldn't feel right anymore. I stayed up nights staring at the ceiling, imagining her funeral, the headlines, the whispers, the way they'd paint me as the monster. I even picked up the phone once to call the transplant coordinator. But something stopped me. Not fear, not bitterness, a gut feeling, a voice that said, wait, look closer. So I did. I went through the family documents, old medical forms, insurance papers, the bottom drawer in my mom's desk she thought I'd forgotten about. That's where I found it, a sealed manila envelope. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity won. Inside, hospital records, lab work, a copy of my birth certificate, and a note I'd never seen before. A sticky note, faded but clear. Keep this in case Sierra ever asks. My hands were shaking. I took the documents to a private DNA clinic the next morning. No lawyers, no accusations, just a quiet swab of my cheek and a deep breath. 2 weeks later, I picked up the results in person. I opened them alone in my car, hands cold, heart in my throat. Probability of full sibling relationship, 0%. Shared DNA, negligible. Nicole wasn't my sister, not biologically, not genetically. Suddenly, everything made sense. Why she looked nothing like me. Why our birthdays were barely 6 months apart. Why Dad's name was missing from one of the birth certificates. They'd lied. For years. And let me suffer for a lie I didn't even know I was keeping. But they had no idea I knew. Not yet. And I planned to keep it that way until the perfect moment. Once I had the DNA results, everything inside me went still. Not chaotic. Not angry, just still. That kind of quiet you only feel when something finally clicks into place. And, deep down you were never crazy. I carried those papers around with me for days, folded them into my journal, slept with it on the nightstand, not because I needed to reread them. I'd memorized every line, but because they made me feel safe. For the first time in my life, I had proof. It wasn't just favoritism. It wasn't just dysfunction. It was deception. I didn't confront them right away. That would have been satisfying, sure. But I wasn't after an explosion. I was after clarity. So I waited. I showed up to family meetings. I answered just enough texts to keep them off balance. I let my mother believe I was thinking it over. The irony? The kinder I became, the more desperate they got. They thought I was softening. Nicole sent a text one night, short, cold. I know we've had issues, but you can do this one decent thing. She didn't ask. She commanded. That was always her way. Even in childhood, she got what she wanted. She didn't negotiate. She took. And if I didn't give willingly, my parents punished me for making things difficult. 1 week before the family meeting, I booked a quiet appointment with a lawyer. Nothing litigious, just questions. I wanted to understand how deep their lies went: birth certificates, guardianship, medical history. He gave me more than I expected. Apparently, Nicole had been adopted privately. Closed paperwork. Paid under the table. Never disclosed. No court file. Just my mother's signature and a buried paper trail. I wasn't shocked, but I was done pretending. So when my parents invited me over, said they were finally ready to talk face to face, I agreed. They wanted control. They wanted to corner me, manipulate me, guilt me into submission in the same living room they'd raised me in like a second-class citizen. Instead, I walked in with my envelope. Calm. Clean. Intentional. Mom looked relieved. Dad gave a weak smile. Nicole was sitting under a blanket, like some tragic Victorian heroine. Before we start, I said, I brought something. Mom raised her eyebrows. Paperwork. I nodded. Proof. I took the envelope out and placed it gently on the table. I want you to read this out loud. She looked confused. Why? Because it's about your daughter, I said, turning to Nicole, and whether or not she ever was mine. That was when the air changed. And for once, I wasn't scared. I wasn't hoping to be loved, forgiven, or heard. I was just done being lied to. And the truth? It was about to speak louder than any apology they never gave. The room went quiet when I placed the envelope on the table. Not the kind of quiet that comes before an argument, the kind that comes before a storm. My mother looked at the envelope like it was something toxic. My father leaned back, arms crossed, his default when he wanted to appear calm while boiling underneath. And Nicole didn't move at all. She just stared at me, jaw tight, eyes hard. There was no fear in her face, just that same smugness. She wore the night she lied to my fiancé and the day she tried to get me fired. I could see her thinking, you won't go through with this. She still believed she could win. My mother was the first to speak. What is this supposed to be? I stayed seated. My voice didn't rise. It's a DNA test from a certified lab taken 2 weeks ago. It says that Nicole and I share no biological connection. None. I let the words hang. My mother scoffed. That's ridiculous. You're sisters. No, I said, sliding the paper across the coffee table. You raised us like sisters. You said we were, but you lied. Dad leaned forward, picked up the paper, scanned it, and paled. His hands actually shook. Where did you get this? From your filing cabinet. Bottom drawer. Beneath the tax folders, I said. You left the birth records and medical forms. Sloppy, really. I turned to my mom. You wanted me to believe I owed her something. You wanted me to feel guilty for walking away. But you lied about who she is. You made me the backup plan for someone who never once treated me like a sister. Nicole shifted in her chair now. Her mouth opened, closed. Then finally she snapped. This doesn't change anything. I am your sister. We grew up together. Yeah, I said. And you slept with my fiancé. Tried to ruin my job. Turned our parents against me. And now you want my body to save yours? I don't owe you that. I'm dying, she said, eyes gleaming. And I'm healing, I said back, steady as stone. which means I don't set myself on fire just because you're cold. My mother stood up. Sierra, don't do this. Don't throw away your family over paperwork. I looked at her, really looked. This was the woman who let me be bullied at home, who blamed me for being too sensitive, who watched me break and called it drama. And she was still doing it, still rewriting the truth in real time. You threw me away years ago, I said. You just never thought I'd grow up enough to walk away myself. Dad tried once more. We raised you. Doesn't that mean anything? It does, I said. It means I learned exactly what kind of person I'll never be. I stood, picked up my bag, paused at the door. No one followed. Nicole was crying now, maybe from fear, maybe from fury, maybe because, for the first time in her life, no one was rushing in to save her. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel guilt, either. Just release. Because the truth wasn't a weapon. It was freedom. And I had waited my entire life to finally hold it in my hands. I didn't go home and cry. I didn't check my phone obsessively or sit by the window like some abandoned child waiting to be chased. I didn't even feel hollow. I felt clean, like I'd finally shed a skin I'd been suffocating in for years. One made of guilt, gaslighting, and forced sisterhood. The fallout started almost immediately. 2 days later, my aunt called. She said she'd heard some ridiculous rumor about Nicole not being my real sister. That surely I was just lashing out and didn't mean what I said. I let her talk for 3 full minutes. Then I hung up. I didn't explain. I didn't argue. I'd spent my whole life giving people access to my pain like it was public property. That ended now. A week after the confrontation, I found out Nicole had been moved to another donor list. No exact matches. The urgency was rising. I still didn't answer her texts. At first, they came every day, long, manipulative monologues about forgiveness, about history, about choosing love over bitterness. Then, when I didn't respond, they changed. You're evil. You want me to die. No wonder no one ever liked you. And then the most honest one. They always picked me. You know why? Because you were too cold to love. I read that one twice. Not because it hurt, but because it was a confession. She knew. She'd always known. And now she was finally admitting it. The power dynamic had flipped, and she hated it. I deleted every message without replying. I knew my parents were scrambling behind the scenes. My cousin told me there had been family meetings full of raised voices and questions like, what else have they lied about? Apparently, a few relatives had started to distance themselves from my parents. They didn't like being dragged into a scandal, especially one they couldn't spin. Good. Let the truth do its job. I didn't gloat. I focused on rebuilding. I signed up for therapy not to fix myself, but to unlearn the survival tactics I'd been forced to adopt in a family that only knew how to use or discard. I got a new job, one where no one knew my story, where I didn't walk into rooms with invisible bruises and a reputation crafted by someone else's jealousy. I even started seeing someone. Slowly, carefully. For the first time, I didn't over-explain my trauma on the first date. I didn't feel the need to justify why I protect my peace like a locked door. He asked questions gently. He waited for real answers. And that made me feel safe in a way biology never had. One evening, while folding laundry, I came across the envelope again, the DNA results. I almost threw them out, but I didn't. I tucked them into a folder marked, not shame, just truth. Because that's what they were now. A fact, not a wound. I realized something that night. The revenge wasn't in the reveal. It wasn't in the silence or the ruined reputations or the way my parents couldn't walk into church without whispers following them down the pews. It was in the healing, in the boundaries I built, the joy I allowed myself, the fact that I didn't feel the need to explain anything to anyone anymore. Nicole had once destroyed my relationship, my career, my name, and she did it with a smirk, knowing my parents would protect her. And they had, until I protected myself. And now, they had to live with the truth, not because I shouted it from rooftops, but because I refused to carry their silence any longer. 3 months later, I moved. A small apartment in a quiet city where no one knew my name unless I wanted them to. No old neighbors. No family friends who didn't want to pick sides. No well-meaning coworkers asking, "How's your sister doing?" Just space. The first night I slept there, I left the window open. No traffic. No yelling from the apartment downstairs. Just crickets and my own heartbeat. I stood in the center of the room and whispered out loud, "You're safe now." Not for anyone else to hear. Just me. Because for so long I didn't feel safe. Not in my own home. Not even in my own skin. I had been raised in a family that weaponized love, turned it into a transaction. If I was useful, I got to stay. If I stepped out of line, even once, I became the villain. And for a while, I believed them. Believed I was cold, bitter, selfish. But now I understood what they called selfish was just me learning to say no. I set boundaries like concrete walls. No calls. No visits. I changed my number. Blocked every one of them. And I didn't second guess it. Some nights were quiet. A little too quiet. I'd stare at the ceiling and wonder, did I go too far? Should I have explained more? But then I'd remember the restaurant meeting. The way my mother's face twisted when I read the DNA test. The look of disbelief, not because it couldn't be true, but because I dared to say it out loud. I stopped asking myself if I was harsh, and started asking why they never thought they were. I made new friends. Carefully. Slowly. People who didn't need my suffering to feel strong. People who asked how my day was and didn't expect me to earn kindness in return. One of them, Talia, was the first person I ever told the whole story to without minimizing it. She didn't interrupt. Didn't try to fix it. She just said, "That must have been so lonely. I'm really glad you got out." And I cried. Harder than I did when Tyler left. Harder than when I opened the test results. Because someone saw me and didn't use it as leverage. I celebrated my birthday alone that year. Dinner at a cafe. A small cake with a single candle. No photos. No fake smiles. Just peace. I made a wish. But it wasn't for love or approval or closure. It was just this. May I never again doubt what I know is true. Because the greatest gift I'd ever given myself was walking away before they could take anything else. A year after the DNA test, I sat at the edge of a lake just outside the city. No noise, no expectations, just the wind brushing over the surface like a secret it promised not to tell. I'd brought one thing with me, a letter, not to mail, just to write. It had taken me months to start. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I needed to wait until I could write it without shaking. It started simply, to the people who said I owed them everything, this is what I owed myself. I didn't list every betrayal, every silence, every time they watched Nicole take while I bled to keep the family image polished. I didn't mention the night my mother stood between us like a judge and told me, "She's still your sister, whether you like it or not." Instead, I wrote about who I'd become. A woman who sleeps through the night, who laughs without checking who's watching, who doesn't walk into rooms with her hands half raised, ready to defend her existence. I wrote about the quiet joy of cooking for myself, of friends who refill your water without being asked, of waking up and realizing no one is waiting to twist your kindness into obligation. The letter ended with this. Asterisk, you taught me that blood means loyalty, but you only bled me dry. I'm done donating parts of myself just to be tolerated. You raised me to believe I had to earn love, but I've learned peace doesn't need proof. Asterisk, I folded the paper, tore it slowly, not out of rage, but ritual. I let the pieces scatter into the water like ash. And for once, I didn't imagine who might come running after me. No fantasy where they read it and weep. No desperate apology or family reckoning. Just the clean, unremarkable freedom of letting it go. Later that night, I lit a candle in my apartment. No one sent me gifts. No one said my name like it tasted like resentment. And I was okay with that, because I stopped confusing absence with abandonment. Sometimes absence is healing. Sometimes it's the boundary your soul begged you to draw years ago. I looked around the space I'd built. Nothing extravagant, just mine. On the wall was a framed print I bought for myself a few months back. For words. Peace over permission. Always. That's what this entire journey had been about. Not revenge. Not punishment. release. They tried to guilt me with the word family. But what is family if it only shows up with conditions? What is family if it destroys you, then expects you to save the pieces? I still don't know who Nicole really is. I don't know why my parents lied or what they thought they were protecting. But I know this. Love doesn't manipulate, and DNA doesn't entitle. They told me I was heartless, but I was never heartless. I just finally stopped giving mine to people who only came with knives. So no, I didn't save Nicole's life, but I saved my own, and that was enough.